For breaking news in the NFL, Raheem Morris will be the next head coach of the Falcons, according to Adam Schefter. The news comes after a thorough interview process by the team where they interviewed 14 candidates, including Bill Belichick and Mike Vrabel. Morris was the Rams' defensive coordinator on Sean McVay's staff. He's coming back to a familiar place. He was in the Falcons staff from 2015 to 2020. He was the interim head coach for 11 games in 2020 after the firing of Dan Quinn, in addition to his stops in Atlanta and LA. Morris was also head coach of the Buccaneers for 3 seasons from 2009 to 2011 after 2 stints as an assistant there and a secondary coach in Washington for 3 seasons before first joining Atlanta in 2015. Senior NFL insider Adam Schefter broke this story, and he joins us now with much more. Schefty, so again, this interview process for the Falcons, thorough. They interviewed Bill Belichick and Mike Vrabel among the 14. Why did they ultimately land on Raheem Morris?
Really, if you talk to the Los Angeles Rams, where he's coached recently, they believe that this was long overdue, that Raheem Morris has learned his lessons, that he's essentially grown into the head coach that the Falcons believe he's going to be. They met with him on Tuesday night at Arthur Blank's home, the second interview, and he continued to impress him. It wasn't like they didn't know him, Kevin. He was the interim head coach of that franchise. But since he was the head coach in the NFC South with the Buccaneers, and since he was the head coach, interim head coach in Atlanta in 2020, Raheem Morris has continued to grow, improve, and refine his ways as a head coach. And every year, he's been a candidate, but he's never gotten serious consideration. I think the Rams really were pushing him. I think the league office wanted to see Raheem Morris get a job. And I think he ultimately deserved to get one a long time ago, but it didn't come together until just now, where he beat out a number of high-profile coaching candidates to go back to Atlanta, an organization he knows well, and take over as the Falcons head coach.
Handful of reaction from NFL players, including Jalen Ramsey, who played under Morris in L.A. He's now with the Dolphins, saying Falcons got one of, if not the best coach in the NFL for real. Now, I mentioned Belichick. I mentioned Vrabel. Pete Carroll also finds himself without a job, and there are 2 remaining vacancies in Seattle and Washington. What can you share with us about the prospects, their prospects, these 3 big names in this coaching cycle?
My understanding is that Seattle and Washington want to wait until after this weekend's conference championship games, when they're looking at any number of the coaches involved in these particular games, including the Lions offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, the Ravens defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, Aaron Glenn, the Lions defensive coordinator. There are some high-profile coaches in these conference championship games that merit consideration. Both organizations are planning to wait, and that leaves coaches like Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick on the sidelines right now. Now, keep in mind, when we talk about Bill Belichick, the biggest name out there right now, along with Pete Carroll and Mike Vrabel, Bill Belichick interviewed twice in Atlanta. That was the place that he had a chance to land a head coaching job. And again, my understanding is that Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner, supported Bill Belichick, but ultimately it's a collaborative process. And in the end, the organization decided to go with Raheem Morris. That means that Bill Belichick right now is on the sideline. And unless all of a sudden Seattle or Washington jump in and begin to interview him, it looks like Bill Belichick will not land one of these jobs in this particular head coaching cycle. And we have some high-profile names that will be on the sideline, as some of these jobs have been filled by some people that essentially weren't expected to land some of these jobs.
All right, with much more on this, Dan Orlovsky joins us. I'm stunned that Bill Belichick's still in the open market.
Yeah,
and a handful of jobs have been filled here. What's your reaction? What does it tell you that Bill is still available as a head coach?
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's really from the starting point, the 2 big questions surrounding Coach Belichick were, how much power were you actually willing to relinquish when it comes to picking players and putting together the roster and having final say? And then if you were the team, Atlanta, that sat down and interviewed him, how much were you willing to give up? And was there ever the ability to get to a middle ground? And Kev, I've been saying this for weeks. Who are you bringing with you on your offensive staff? We know you can still coach defensive football, but who is going to be your offensive coordinator? And because of the lack of offensive performance that has happened really over the better course of last 6 years in New England, you're sitting there going, okay, is it just Josh McDaniels, who was his longtime offensive coordinator? Bill O'Brien obviously went back to college at Ohio State. So maybe he doesn't have the person that the organization was comfortable with, because Atlanta is going to have to go make a move at quarterback for a young player. Maybe they weren't happy with that potential person stewarding that young quarterback's development.
Solving the quarterback riddle, that has been the key for, of course, Belichick since Tom Brady went to Tampa. Meanwhile, Raheem Morris, a defensive guy, gets a second chance. Well-deserved, of course, because he was a coach, young coach with the Bucs, and that didn't turn out really well. He gets another opportunity. What do you think about this fit here specifically in Atlanta?
Yeah, I love it. Real quick story. So Louis Riddick and I with Fowler and Rutledge call Monday Night Football. We called a game versus the Rams, the Rams and the Bengals. And just when you sat with Raheem Morris, I remember very quickly, I was like, yo, he's awesome. Yeah. This guy is great. He should be a head coach at some point again in the NFL. The joy that he had about not only football, but the development of the young players, the passion that he had, the excitement that he had. He had a lot of that energy that you look for in a head coach. So I love that. Defensive-minded head coach. He's been in that division. We know that division, although won by Tampa Bay this year, doesn't have like a necessarily top-heavy team. And I think there's a lot of pieces in Atlanta that are really good. I love the fact that he came and learned under Sean McVay, that he learned not only that leadership role under Sean, but also watch Sean call plays. And so I would think that he'll want to bring an offense with him that comes from that McShanahan tree, the McVay-Shanahan tree. Yeah. And then also, who's going to be their quarterback? And I do not think that they are going to stand pat in Atlanta and just get someone.
You can't.
I think this is the year that Atlanta goes, we are going to jump in whatever it takes to go get a real player at that spot.
They have a top 10 pick. And by the way, Morris was a guy who was an assistant coach on that staff for 5 years in Atlanta. He knows the inner workings of that system as well as Arthur Blank. So good for him. Dan, much more from him coming up as SportsCenter continues this hour.